What would you do if the only way to escape was to die? And what would you do if your death destroyed an innocent man? Judith Brown walked into a lake one cold morning and never came back. Her car was found abandoned, her shoes lined up on the shore, her phone left behind with one final, haunting message. The police called it suicide. Then they called it murder. Her husband, David, was arrested within days. The evidence was damning: life insurance policies, a history of abuse, a witness who placed him at the scene. But there was one problem. Judith Brown wasn't dead. She was 300 miles away, watching the news coverage from a cabin in the woods, watching her carefully planned escape turn into a nightmare she never anticipated. Now she faces an impossible choice: stay dead and let an innocent man go to prison for her murder, or come forward and face the man who made her life a living hell, a man with the connections and resources to make sure she never escapes again. This is a story about survival, justice, and the deadly consequences of desperate choices. A story where nobody is innocent, everyone has secrets, and the truth is far more complicated than anyone imagined. Because sometimes the only way to save yourself is to destroy everything you've ever known. The bruise on Judith Brown's cheek had faded to a sickly yellow-green, but the memory of how she got it burned fresh as ever. She stood in the bathroom of their suburban home, staring at her reflection under the harsh fluorescent light, practicing the words she'd rehearsed 1,000 times. "I'm leaving you, David." Simple, direct, final. But she'd said those words before, 3 times to be exact, and each time David had found a way to pull her back, first with promises, then with tears, the last time with threats that made her blood run cold. "If you ever leave me, Judith," he'd whispered against her ear, his grip tight enough to leave fingerprints on her arm. "I'll find you. Wherever you go, whatever name you use, I'll find you." She believed him. David was a successful defense attorney with connections that stretched across 3 states. He had friends in law enforcement, private investigators on speed dial, and the kind of meticulous patience that turned him into a predator when he wanted something. Tonight was different, though. Tonight, she wasn't planning to leave. She was planning to die. Judith's hands trembled as she pulled out her phone and opened the encrypted messaging app. The plan was already in motion. Her friend, Abigail, the only person who knew the truth, had confirmed everything was ready. The cabin, the new identity, the cash. All she had to do was make it through one more night. Downstairs, she heard the front door open. David was home. "Judith?" His voice echoed through the house, smooth as silk and twice as dangerous. "Where are you, darling?" She took a deep breath, deleted the messages, and stepped out of the bathroom wearing the mask she'd perfected over 5 years of marriage, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm here," she called back, descending the stairs. David stood in the foyer, his tailored suit immaculate, his dark hair perfectly styled. To anyone else, he looked like the perfect husband, successful, handsome, devoted. Only Judith knew the monster that lived behind those warm brown eyes. "I brought dinner," he said, holding up a bag from her favorite Italian restaurant. "Thought we could have a nice evening together." This was how it always started. The kindness after the cruelty, the gifts after the violence, the cycle that had trapped her for so long. But not anymore. "That sounds wonderful," Judith said, and meant it, because this would be their last dinner together. By tomorrow morning, Judith Brown would be dead, and the man standing in front of her would be a murderer. They ate in silence at first, the kind of silence that had become more common over the past year. David scrolled through his phone between bites, occasionally making comments about his cases, his colleagues, the partners at the firm who didn't appreciate his brilliance. Judith nodded in all the right places, made appropriate sounds of agreement, played her part. She'd become an expert at reading his moods, anticipating his needs, smoothing over potential conflicts before they erupted. It was exhausting, and tomorrow it would finally be over. "You seem distant," David said suddenly, setting down his fork. His eyes were sharp, assessing. "Is something wrong?" Judith's heart rate spiked, but she kept her expression neutral. "Just tired. It's been a long week at school." "The kids giving you trouble?" "No more than usual. You know how 8th graders can be." David reached across the table and took her hand. To anyone watching through the window, it would look tender, loving, but Judith felt the pressure of his grip just a fraction too tight. "You'd tell me if something was wrong, wouldn't you?" he asked. "We don't have secrets from each other." The irony was almost funny. David had more secrets than Judith could count. The locked file cabinets in his office, the phone calls he took in the garage, the business trips that never quite added up. But she'd learned not to ask questions, learned that curiosity led to accusations, accusations led to arguments, and arguments led to bruises she'd have to explain away. "Of course," she lied. "No secrets." He smiled, released her hand, and went back to his dinner. After they'd cleaned up, David suggested they watch a movie, another part of the performance of their perfect marriage. They settled on the couch, Judith tucked under his arm in a position that looked affectionate but felt like a cage. She watched the screen without seeing it, her mind running through tomorrow's plan one more time. 6 a.m. Wake up early, tell David she was going for a drive to clear her head. 7 a.m. Drive to Clearwater Lake. 8 a.m. Stage the scene, car, shoes, phone, message. 8:30 a.m. Disappear into the woods where Abigail would be waiting with a change of clothes and a car. 9 a.m. Judith Brown ceases to exist. It was simple, clean, foolproof. Except for the part where David would be blamed for her death. That part had been Abigail's idea, one Judith had resisted at first. "He deserves it," Abigail had argued. "Everything he's done to you, let him face consequences for once." But murder charges? That seemed extreme. Judith only wanted to escape, not destroy him. "He won't be convicted," Abigail had assured her. "There's no body. The case will eventually go cold. He'll live under suspicion, but that's not the same as prison. Think of it as cosmic justice." Judith had agreed, though the decision still sat uneasily in her stomach. Around 11 p.m., David stood and stretched. "I'm heading to bed. You coming?" "In a few minutes. I want to finish this." He kissed the top of her head and headed upstairs. Judith waited until she heard the bedroom door close, then pulled out her phone one last time. One message to Abigail. "Tomorrow, 6 a.m. Don't be late." The response came immediately. "I'll be there. Are you sure about this?" Judith looked around the living room, the expensive furniture David had chosen, the art on the walls that she'd never liked, the life that had slowly suffocated her for 5 years. "I'm sure," she typed back. "See you on the other side." She deleted the conversation, cleared her phone's history, and sat in the dark for a long moment. Tomorrow, Judith would walk into a lake and never come back. Tomorrow, Judith Brown would die, and someone new, someone free would be born from the ashes. She just had to survive one more night. Upstairs, David lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. Something was off about Judith tonight. He couldn't put his finger on it, but after 5 years of marriage, he'd learned to read the subtle signals. The way she'd avoided his eyes during dinner, the tension in her shoulders, the careful, measured responses to his questions. She was planning something. David picked up his phone and opened the tracking app he'd installed on Judith's phone months ago. She didn't know about it, of course. She thought her phone was private, her messages secure. But David hadn't become a successful defense attorney by trusting people. He'd learned early that everyone had secrets. Everyone lied. The key was knowing the truth before they did. The app showed Judith's current location,
downstairs in the living room. Nothing suspicious there, but he scrolled back through her location history from the past few weeks. There, a pattern he'd missed before. Every Tuesday afternoon, she'd been going somewhere that wasn't school, wasn't the grocery store, wasn't anywhere she'd mentioned. David zoomed in on the address. It was a coffee shop on the edge of town, not somewhere Judith would normally go. He made a note to check it out tomorrow. And if Judith was up to something, if she was planning to leave him again like she'd tried before, well, he'd dealt with that problem 3 times already. He could deal with it again. David smiled in the darkness and closed his eyes. Whatever Judith was planning, he'd be ready. He always was. What Judith doesn't know is that her carefully laid plan is about to collide with a truth far more terrifying than she could ever imagine.
The next morning arrived with a gray sky that promised rain. Perfect, Judith thought as she stood at the edge of Clearwater Lake, 30 miles outside the city. The water was dark and cold, fed by underground springs that kept it frigid even in summer. Abigail stood beside her, dressed in civilian clothes, her detective's badge hidden away. They'd been friends since childhood, had survived middle school bullies and high school heartbreaks together. But this was different. This was conspiracy. This was fraud. This could destroy both their lives. "You're sure about this?" Abigail asked for the 10th time, her voice tight with worry. "I'm sure," Judith replied, though her heart hammered against her ribs. The plan was simple, at least in theory. Judith would stage a drowning. Her car would be found abandoned at the lake's edge, her shoes neatly placed on the shore, her phone left behind with a final text message to David that was deliberately vague and concerning. The lake was known for its dangerous currents and its depth. Bodies sometimes weren't recovered for weeks, if at all. By the time anyone started asking questions, Judith would be 3 states away with a new name, new hair color, and a new life. Dr. Michael Foster, the medical examiner, was the final piece of the puzzle. He owed Abigail a favor from years back when she'd looked the other way on his daughter's minor drug charge. When the time came, he'd ensure the paperwork was messy enough, the identification questionable enough, that no one would look too closely. "The water's freezing," Judith said, testing it with her hand. "How long do I need to stay in?" "Long enough to make it convincing. Your lips need to be blue, your skin pale. We need to sell this, Judith." They'd practiced the timeline a dozen times. Abigail would discover the scene 2 hours after Judith's car was reported abandoned by a passing jogger. By then, Judith would be miles away, warming up in a safe house while the search and rescue teams dragged the lake. "What about David?" Judith asked. "Where is he right now?" "At his office. I confirmed it myself. He has meetings all morning. His alibi is airtight for the time of your disappearance, but that won't matter. We made sure there's enough circumstantial evidence to point his direction once the investigation starts." The burner phone with the deleted messages, the life insurance policy David had taken out on Judith 6 months ago, the neighbors who'd heard arguments, the hospital records from Judith's accidental falls. It would all add up. Judith stripped off her jacket and shoes, leaving them arranged on the shore exactly as Abigail had instructed. She'd worn her wedding ring, her watch, everything that would make it look real. "Once you do this, there's no going back," Abigail warned. "You can never contact anyone from your old life. Not your sister, not your parents, no one." "I know." Judith had already mourned those losses. Her parents had passed away years ago. Her sister lived in Australia, and they'd barely spoken in a decade. David had systematically isolated her from everyone else. She waded into the water, gasping as the cold shocked her system. The lake bottom dropped off quickly, and within 6 steps she was swimming, her muscles already beginning to cramp.
"15 minutes," Abigail called out, checking her watch. "Then get to the extraction point." Judith nodded and pushed deeper into the water, letting the cold seep into her bones. She thought about David, probably sitting in his corner office right now, completely unaware that his world was about to implode. She thought about freedom. She thought about finally being safe. What Judith didn't think about was the hiker on the far shore, the one with the telephoto lens, the one who was photographing wildlife that morning and would capture something far more interesting. She didn't think about the fact that in exactly 72 hours, David Brown would be arrested for her murder. And she certainly didn't think about the video that would surface 1 week later, the one that would change everything.
Detective Sam Johnson had seen a lot of death in his 20 years on the force, but something about the abandoned car at Clearwater Lake made his gut twist. Maybe it was the neatly arranged shoes, too perfect, too staged. Maybe it was the phone left on the driver's seat with its ominous final message still on the screen. Or maybe it was the way his partner, Abigail Thompson, had gone pale when the call came in. "You know her?" Sam asked, watching Abigail stare at the driver's license photo they'd pulled from the registration. "Judith Brown," Abigail said, her voice carefully neutral. "We went to school together, lost touch over the years." It was a lie, and Sam knew it. He'd been partnering with Abigail long enough to read her tells. The way she wouldn't meet his eyes, the slight tremor in her hand as she held the evidence bag. But he also trusted her enough not to push. Not yet. "Husband's a lawyer," Sam continued, scanning his tablet. "David Brown, big-shot defense attorney, works at Morrison & Associates downtown. Have we contacted him? Uniform's on the way to his office now." The search and rescue team was already suiting up, preparing to drag the lake. The water was deep here, nearly 200 feet in some spots, with caves and underwater channels that had claimed lives before. "If she went in," the dive team leader said, pointing at the calm surface, "currents could have taken her anywhere. We might not find her for days, maybe not at all." Sam watched Abigail's jaw tighten. Something was definitely wrong here. "Let's talk to the husband," he said. David Brown's office was everything Sam expected. Mahogany furniture, law degrees from prestigious universities on the walls, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. The man himself was composed, almost too composed, when Sam and Abigail delivered the news. "I don't understand," David said, sitting down slowly in his leather chair. "Judith was fine this morning. We had breakfast together. She said she was going to the art supply store." "What time was that?" Sam asked, notebook open. 7:30. I left for work at 8. She was still home." "And you didn't hear from her after that?" David pulled out his phone, scrolling through messages. "She texted me at 9:15, said she needed some space, that she was going for a drive." He showed them the message. "I need to think. Don't worry about me. I just need some time alone." "Did that concern you?" Abigail asked, speaking for the first time. David looked at her, and Sam caught something flash across the lawyer's face. Recognition? Suspicion? "Should it have?" David asked carefully. "Your wife's car was found abandoned at a lake, Mr. Brown. Her shoes were on the shore. Her phone left behind with that message still on the screen. We have to consider all possibilities. You think she—" David's voice cracked convincingly. "You think she hurt herself? We're conducting a thorough search. Is there any reason your wife might have been suicidal?" "No, absolutely not. Judith was happy. We were happy." Another lie, Sam thought, watching the man's micro-expressions. But was he lying because he'd done something, or because he was hiding the cracks in a perfect facade? "We'll need to search your home," Abigail said, "and we'll need you to come down to the station to give a formal statement." "Am I a suspect?" David asked, his lawyer instincts kicking in. "You're the husband," Sam replied simply. "Standard procedure." As they left the office, Sam pulled Abigail aside in the hallway. "You want to tell me what's really going on?" "What do you mean?" "Don't play me, Abby. I saw your face when you recognized her name.
You two were more than old school friends." Abigail met his eyes, and for a moment Sam thought she might confess whatever she was hiding. Instead, she said, "Judith called me 3 weeks ago, said she thought her husband was dangerous, that she was scared." "And you didn't file a report?" "She wouldn't let me, said she didn't have proof, that David would destroy her in court if she tried anything. I told her to document everything, to build a case." Abigail's voice dropped. "I should have done more." It explained the guilt at least, but Sam's instincts told him there was more to the story. "Let's find her. Dead or alive, we'll find her." What neither detective knew was that at that exact moment, Judith Brown was sitting in a truck stop bathroom 200 miles away, cutting her long dark hair short and dyeing it blonde. And David Brown, back in his office, was making a phone call to the one person who terrified him more than any detective: his mother.
Judith's hands shook as she held the cheap disposable razor, watching chunks of her dark hair fall into the sink. The blonde dye sat in a box on the counter, waiting. She barely recognized the woman staring back at her in the cracked mirror of the truck stop bathroom. This was it, the point of no return. She'd made it to the safe house Abigail had arranged, a rundown cabin in the woods owned by someone who owed the detective a favor and knew how to keep their mouths shut. The plan was to stay there for 2 weeks, let the investigation run its course, then move to her permanent relocation in Oregon under her new identity. Catherine Hayes, that was her name now. The documents were perfect, courtesy of a forger Abigail had found through her years working Vice. Social security number, driver's license, even a thin credit history. Catherine Hayes had existed on paper for 3 years, just waiting for Judith to step into her life. But first, Judith needed to know if the plan had worked. She pulled out the burner phone Abigail had given her, the one with strict instructions, only for emergencies, only for one-way communication. Judith wasn't supposed to turn it on for at least a week. She turned it on anyway. The small television in the cabin's living room crackled to life, and Judith flipped through channels until she found the local news. Her heart stopped as her own face filled the screen. Breaking news in the disappearance of Judith Brown, a 32-year-old art teacher from Riverside Heights. Authorities are searching Clearwater Lake after her vehicle was found abandoned early this morning. The reporter stood at the lake's edge, the same spot where Judith had walked into the water 12 hours ago. Behind her, Judith could see the search and rescue boats, divers suited up, the whole operation she'd set in motion. Brown's husband, prominent defense attorney David Brown, spoke to reporters earlier today. The screen cut to David, standing outside their house, looking devastated. His eyes were red, his voice breaking as he spoke. "Please, if anyone knows anything about my wife's whereabouts, contact the police immediately. Judith, if you're watching this, please come home. Whatever's wrong, we can fix it. I love you." Judith felt bile rise in her throat. How many times had she heard those words before? How many times had "I love you" been followed by accusations, by rage, by hands around her throat? But watching him on screen, she had to admit he was convincing. If she didn't know better, she'd believe he was a heartbroken husband desperate to find his missing wife. The reporter continued. Brown's husband, prominent defense attorney David Brown, spoke to reporters earlier today. The screen cut to David, standing outside their house, looking devastated. His eyes were red, his voice breaking as he spoke. "Please, if anyone knows anything about my wife's whereabouts, contact the police immediately. Judith, if you're watching this, please come home. Whatever's wrong, we can fix it. I love you." Judith felt bile rise in her throat. How many times had she heard those words before? How many times had "I love you" been followed by accusations, by rage, by hands around her throat? But watching him on screen, she had to admit he was convincing. If she didn't know better, she'd believe he was a heartbroken husband desperate to find his missing wife. The reporter continued. Police say they're following several leads and ask anyone with information to come forward. The search of Clearwater Lake will continue through the night. Judith switched off the TV and sat in the darkness, listening to the sound of rain beginning to fall outside. By now, Abigail would have started planting the seeds of suspicion. The life insurance policy David had taken out, the pattern of hospital visits, the neighbors' statements about arguments. It would take time, but eventually the investigation would turn toward David. And when they couldn't find a body, when the evidence of his abuse became clear, they'd charge him anyway. Judith had researched the statistics. 70% conviction rate in domestic violence murder cases, even without a body. With the right prosecutor, with the right jury, David would go to prison, and she would be free. Her new phone buzzed, a news alert. Breaking. Witness comes forward in Judith Brown disappearance case, claims to have seen David Brown's vehicle near Clearwater Lake on morning of wife's disappearance. Judith's blood ran cold. That wasn't part of the plan. David's alibi was supposed to be solid. He was supposed to be convicted on circumstantial evidence, not false testimony. She grabbed the burner phone, fingers hovering over Abigail's number. But calling would break protocol. Calling could expose everything. Instead, she opened the news app and read the full story. Lily Porter, 26, a barista at the Lakeview Cafe near Clearwater Lake, told police she served coffee to a man matching David Brown's description around 8:45 a.m. on the morning of his wife's disappearance. "I remember him because he seemed nervous," Porter stated. "He kept checking his phone and looking out toward the lake." Judith read it twice, then 3 times. This didn't make sense. David had been in his office all morning. She knew because Abigail had verified it. Unless Abigail had lied. Unless the plan was more complicated than Judith had been told. Or unless Lily Porter was lying and Judith had just discovered that her simple escape plan had become something far more dangerous. Outside, thunder rumbled across the dark sky. Inside, Judith Brown, who was no longer Judith Brown, realized she might have made a terrible mistake. 3 days later, David Brown sat in an interrogation room that smelled of stale coffee and desperation. His lawyer, Bernard Klein, sat beside him, a legal pad covered in notes, his expression grim. Across the table, Detectives Sam Johnson and Abigail Thompson watched him with the kind of patient intensity that came from years of breaking down lies. "Let's go through this one more time," Sam said, his voice deceptively casual. "The morning your wife disappeared. Walk me through your day." David sighed, running a hand through his hair. He'd told this story so many times it should have been automatic by now. But something in the way Abigail was looking at him made his skin crawl. "I woke up at 6:30. Judith was already awake, making breakfast. We ate together, toast, eggs, coffee. We talked about her plans for the day. She mentioned going to the art supply store, maybe working on a new painting. What time did you leave for work?" 8 o'clock. I had a meeting at 9. "And Judith was still home when you left?" "Yes." "Did she seem upset, depressed, unlike herself in any way?" David thought about lying, then remembered Klein's advice, stick as close to the truth as possible. "She'd been quiet lately, distant. I thought maybe she was stressed about work. The school year was ending, lots of grading and paperwork." "You didn't think she might be unhappy in your marriage?" Abigail asked, her first question of the interview. David's eyes snapped to hers. "No, why would you ask that?" "Because we've been talking to your neighbors, Mr. Brown. They've heard arguments, loud ones. Mrs. Patterson next door said she heard glass breaking 2 weeks ago. That was an accident. Judith dropped a vase. And the hospital visits? Sam chimed in, sliding a folder across the table. 3 times in the past year. Sprained wrist, bruised ribs, concussion. Judith was clumsy. She was clumsy, Abigail interrupted, her voice hard. That's what they all say, right before their wives end up dead. Detective, Klein warned, my client has been cooperative. If you're going to make accusations... I'm just stating facts, Abigail said. Fact, Judith Brown had injuries consistent with domestic violence. Fact, you took out a $2 million life insurance policy on her 6 months ago. Fact, a witness places your vehicle near Clearwater Lake the morning she disappeared.
David felt the room tilt. That's impossible! I was in my office all morning. Check the security logs. Check my key card access. I never left the building. Sam and Abigail exchanged a look. That was the problem, wasn't it? The security logs did show David entering the building at 8:15 a.m. and not leaving until noon. His secretary confirmed he was in his office. He'd had a video conference call at 9 that involved 4 other people. His alibi was airtight. And yet, Lily Porter had been absolutely certain when she'd identified his photo. That's the man who bought coffee from me that morning. I'm sure of it. Maybe she's mistaken, Klein said, seizing on the inconsistency. Or maybe she's lying. Have you investigated her credibility? Miss Porter has no connection to your client, no reason to lie. Everyone has reasons, Klein shot back. Maybe she wants attention. Maybe she saw the news and convinced herself she remembered something that never happened. Eyewitness testimony is notoriously unreliable. He was right, and Sam knew it. But there was something about this case that didn't sit right. The pieces didn't fit together. We'd like permission to search your home, Abigail said. You already did, 2 days ago. We'd like to do it again, more thoroughly this time. Klein started to object, but David held up his hand. Fine. Search whatever you want. I have nothing to hide. We'll also need your computers, your phone, all electronic devices. Absolutely not, Klein said. Those contain privileged client communications. Then we'll get a warrant. Then get one. The interview ended in a stalemate. But as David and Klein left the station, Sam turned to Abigail. He's either innocent or the best liar I've ever seen. He's a defense attorney, Abigail said. Lying is literally his job. You really think he killed her? Abigail was quiet for a long moment. I think Judith was terrified of him. I think she had every reason to be. And I think whether he pushed her into that lake or drove her to jump herself, he's responsible for her death. It wasn't quite an answer, but Sam let it go. What he didn't see was the burner phone hidden in Abigail's jacket pocket, the one that had buzzed with a message an hour ago. Why is there a witness? This wasn't the plan. And Abigail's response, trust me, everything is under control. But that was a lie, because nothing about this was under control anymore. That evening, the district attorney's office made their decision. Rose Winters, a prosecutor with a perfect conviction record and political ambitions that reached all the way to the governor's mansion, held a press conference. Today, we are filing murder charges against David Brown in the death of Judith Brown. While we continue to search for Mrs. Brown's body, we believe we have sufficient evidence to prove that David Brown is responsible for her death. David watched the press conference from his living room, his mother, Grace, sitting beside him on the couch, her face carved from ice and fury. "They're going to destroy you," Mother said. "Everything we've built." "I didn't kill her, Mother." "It doesn't matter if you killed her or not. What matters is what they can prove, and that prosecutor looks hungry." 2 hours later, police arrived with a warrant.
David Brown was arrested for the murder of his wife, Judith Brown. The cameras caught it all: the handcuffs, the perp walk, the flash of photographer's lights. 300 miles away, in a cabin in the woods, Judith Brown watched her husband being led away in handcuffs, and for the first time since this all began, she felt something unexpected: guilt.
Jessica Hartley had built her career on stories other journalists wouldn't touch. The corruption that ran too deep, the conspiracies that seemed too convenient, the cases where the official narrative didn't quite match the evidence. The Judith Brown case was setting off every one of her instincts. She sat in her cramped apartment office, 3 monitors glowing in front of her, each one displaying a different angle of the story: David Brown's arrest, the search of Clearwater Lake, the courthouse where he'd be arraigned in the morning. But it was the 4th monitor that held her attention: security footage from a traffic camera near Clearwater Lake, time-stamped 8:47 a.m. on the morning Judith disappeared. Jessica had spent 3 days convincing a contact at the city's traffic management department to pull the footage. What she'd found was interesting. A black Mercedes, same make and model as David Brown's, driving past the camera heading toward the lake. But the angle was wrong, the license plate partially obscured. You couldn't definitively say it was his car. You also couldn't definitively say it wasn't. Reasonable doubt, Jessica muttered to herself, taking another sip of her cold coffee. That's all the defense needs. She pulled up Lily Porter's social media. The barista had been quiet since giving her statement to police, but Jessica had done some digging. Lily had no criminal record, no obvious connection to the Brown family, no financial incentives to lie. But she did have something interesting in her past: a sealed juvenile record that Jessica's sources couldn't quite access but could confirm existed. "Everyone has secrets," Jessica said, making a note to dig deeper. Her phone rang. Unknown number. "Jessica Hartley?" "Miss Hartley, my name is Tom Bennett. I'm a private investigator working for Bernard Klein, David Brown's attorney. I understand you've been looking into our case." Jessica felt a thrill run through her. This was the call she'd been waiting for. "I'm a journalist, Mr. Bennett. I look into a lot of cases." "This one's different, though, isn't it? You think something doesn't add up." "I think a lot of things don't add up. What do you want?" "I want to give you information, off the record, deep background only." "Why?" "Because the truth matters, and because I think you're one of the few people in this city who might actually be interested in finding it."
20 minutes later, Jessica met Tom Bennett in a parking garage downtown. He was exactly what she expected. Mid-40s, tired eyes, the look of someone who'd seen too much of humanity's worst. "David Brown didn't kill his wife," Tom said without preamble. "I've been investigating for 3 days, and everything I'm finding points away from him, not toward him. The evidence says otherwise. The evidence is circumstantial. The life insurance policy, David's mother insisted he get it. She's got a thing about financial security. The hospital visits, I pulled the actual medical records. Every single injury has a legitimate explanation. The sprained wrist was from a fall while hiking. The bruised ribs were from a car accident. The concussion was from fainting at school. And the witness who saw his car at the lake? That's where it gets interesting." Tom pulled out a folder, handing it to Jessica. "Lily Porter, 26 years old, works at a cafe. Seems like a normal kid, except she's not." Jessica opened the folder and started reading. Her eyes widened. She was in a psychiatric facility at 17, delusional disorder. She became convinced her high school teacher was sending her secret messages. When the teacher got engaged to someone else, Lily accused him of assault. The accusation was proven false, but not before it destroyed the teacher's career. So she has a history of false statements. She has a history of believing things that aren't real. The question is, did she really see David Brown that morning, or did she see the news coverage and convince herself she remembered him? Jessica closed the folder, her mind racing. This was exactly the kind of detail that could crack a case wide open. Why are you giving this to me instead of taking it straight to the prosecutor? Because Rose Winters won't listen. She's too invested in this conviction. But if a journalist breaks the story, if public opinion starts to shift, she'll have to pay attention. And if you're wrong, if David Brown really did kill his wife? Tom met her eyes. Then I'm wrong. But I've been doing this job for 20 years, Miss Hartley, and my gut says David Brown is innocent. Jessica took the folder. I'll look into it. That night she began writing. Not an article, not yet, but an outline, an understanding how an innocent man could be convicted of murder while his wife was still alive. Because that was the real story, wasn't it? Not whether David killed Judith, but whether the justice system could tell the difference between guilt and convenient narrative. She didn't know she was right for the wrong reasons. She didn't know that Judith Brown was watching the same news coverage she was, 300 miles away, wondering what she'd set in motion. And she definitely didn't know that someone else was watching too. Someone who knew exactly where Judith was hiding. Someone who had their own plans for how this story would end.
The courthouse was a circus. Media trucks lined the street, reporters jostling for position on the steps, protesters holding signs that ranged from "Justice for Judith" to "Innocent until proven guilty." Inside, David Brown sat at the defense table, Bernard Klein whispering last-minute strategies in his ear. Across the aisle, Rose Winters radiated confidence, her case file pristine, her suit expensive, her smile predatory. Sam and Abigail sat in the gallery, watching the proceedings. Sam noticed that Abigail's leg was bouncing, a nervous tic she only displayed when something was seriously wrong. "You okay?" he asked quietly. "Fine," she lied. The judge entered and everyone rose. Judge Martha Hernandez was known for running a tight courtroom and having little patience for theatrics. She'd been on the bench for 15 years and had seen every trick lawyers could pull. "The people versus David Brown," the bailiff announced. "How does the defendant plead?" Judge Hernandez asked. David stood, his voice clear and steady. "Not guilty, Your Honor." Rose Winters stood. "Your Honor, given the serious nature of these charges and the defendant's financial resources, the people request remand without bail. Mr. Brown poses a significant flight risk." "Your Honor," Klein countered, "my client is a respected member of this community with deep ties to the area. He's cooperated fully with the investigation. He has no criminal record. And most importantly, the state's case is built entirely on circumstantial evidence and a single questionable witness." "The witness is credible," Rose shot back, "and the evidence is substantial." "The evidence is thin," Klein replied. "No body, no murder weapon, no forensic evidence placing my client at the scene. This is a rush to judgment based on lazy police work and prosecutorial ambition." "Counselors," Judge Hernandez warned, "save it for trial." She reviewed the files in front of her, taking her time. The courtroom held its breath. "Bail is set at $2 million, cash or bond. The defendant will surrender his passport and wear a GPS monitor. Trial date is set for," she consulted her calendar, "10 weeks from today. Next case." The gavel fell. David was led out, but not before catching Abigail's eye in the gallery. There was something in that look, something that made her skin crawl. Recognition, suspicion, knowledge. Did he know? Could he possibly know? Outside the courthouse, Grace Brown was already working the media. Cameras surrounded her as she spoke, every inch the grieving mother defending her wrongly accused son. "My son is innocent," she declared, her voice ringing with authority. "This is a travesty of justice. Judith was a troubled woman who made her choices. My son should not be punished for her instability."
Rose Winters countered with her own press conference on the opposite side of the courthouse steps. David Brown is a manipulative, abusive man who killed his wife to collect insurance money and escape a marriage he no longer wanted. We will prove this beyond reasonable doubt. Jessica Hartley watched both performances, recording everything, taking notes. The story was getting bigger, more complex, and something about it still didn't feel right. She'd spent the past 2 days investigating Lily Porter's background. The psychiatric hospitalization was real. The false accusation was real. But there was something else.
Lily had received a cash payment of $5,000 3 days before she came forward as a witness. The payment came from an account Jessica couldn't quite trace, routed through 2 shell companies. Someone had paid Lily Porter to testify. The question was, who? Meanwhile, 300 miles away, Judith sat in the cabin's kitchen staring at her laptop screen. She'd been following every development, every news article, every social media post. The burner phone sat beside her, Abigail's number pulled up but not dialed. She'd broken protocol once already to ask about the witness. Doing it again would be reckless. But watching David's arraignment, seeing him led into court in handcuffs, seeing his mother's face twisted with fury and pain, Judith felt something crack inside her. This wasn't what she'd wanted. She'd wanted to escape. She'd wanted to be free. She'd wanted David to face consequences for what he'd done to her. But she hadn't wanted this media circus, this public destruction, this feeling that she'd unleashed something she could no longer control. The laptop screen showed a new article. Defense raises questions about key witness credibility. Judith clicked through and read Jessica Hartley's piece. It was carefully worded, just skating the edge of libel, but the implication was clear. Lily Porter's testimony was questionable. Judith's hands trembled as she scrolled through the comments. Most people still believed David was guilty, but some were starting to have doubts. What if he's innocent? Seems like a rush to judgment. Where's the actual evidence? Judith closed the laptop and walked to the window. Rain streaked down the glass. The cabin felt like a prison now, not a sanctuary. Her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "I know what you did." Judith's blood turned to ice. She stared at the screen, her heart hammering. Another text arrived. "I know where you are." Then, "And I know why." Judith's fingers flew across the screen. "Who is this?" The response came immediately. "Someone who can help, or someone who can destroy you. Your choice. Be at the old Miller farm at midnight. Come alone." Judith knew she shouldn't go. Every instinct screamed that this was a trap, but she also knew that whoever had sent those texts held her life in their hands. She had 3 hours to decide. The Miller farm had been abandoned for a decade, its fields overgrown with weeds, its barn slowly collapsing under the weight of neglect. Judith pulled her borrowed car onto the property at 11:55 p.m., her headlights cutting through the darkness. She'd told herself she wouldn't come. She'd packed her bags, ready to run again, to disappear deeper into the wilderness where no one could find her. But the texts kept coming, each one more specific than the last. "I know about Abigail. I know about Dr. Foster. I know about the plan." Whoever this was, they knew everything. Judith killed the engine and sat in the darkness, watching the barn. A single light flickered inside, barely visible through the gaps in the rotting wood. She checked her phone. Midnight. Against every survival instinct she had, Judith got out of the car. The barn door creaked open at her touch. Inside, a battery-powered lantern sat on an old workbench, casting long shadows across the space. At first, Judith thought she was alone. Then a figure stepped out from the shadows. Tom Bennett. "You!" Judith breathed, her hand instinctively reaching for the pepper spray in her pocket.
Easy, Tom said, raising his hands. I'm not here to hurt you. How did you find me? I'm a private investigator, Mrs. Brown. It's literally my job. I pulled out a pack of cigarettes, thought better of it, and put them away. Though I have to say, you did a decent job. The hair color, the new identity. If I hadn't been specifically looking, I might have missed you. What do you want? The same thing you want, the truth. The truth, Judith laughed bitterly. The truth is my husband is an abusive monster who would have killed me eventually. The truth is I did what I had to do to survive. And now he's being charged with your murder. He deserves it. Maybe, Tom conceded, but not like this, not based on manufactured evidence and a paid witness.
Judith felt her stomach drop. What are you talking about? Lily Porter, the barista who claims she saw David's car at the lake. Someone paid her $5,000 to make that statement. Want to guess who? Judith shook her head, but deep down she already knew. Detective Abigail Thompson, Tom said, your best friend, the one person you trusted with your plan. No, Abigail wouldn't. Abigail has been manipulating this investigation from the beginning. She didn't just help you fake your death. She's been building a case to frame your husband for murder. Tom pulled out a folder and handed it to Judith. Inside were bank statements, phone records, meeting logs, all pointing to Abigail's involvement in a conspiracy that went far beyond helping a friend escape. Why? Whispered Judith. That's what I'm trying to figure out. At first, I thought it was just friendship, maybe even romantic feelings, but the more I dig, the more I think there's something else going on. Judith's mind raced. She thought back to the conversations she'd had with Abigail, the plan they'd made. Had there been signs she'd missed? You said you could help, Judith said. How? By convincing you to do the right thing. Come forward. Tell the truth. Yes, you'll face charges for faking your death. Yes, there will be consequences, but you can save an innocent man from spending his life in prison. David isn't innocent. He's abusive, controlling, a terrible husband. Tom's voice was firm, but not unkind. I believe you. I've seen the evidence, but that doesn't make him a murderer, and that doesn't mean he deserves to be convicted of a crime he didn't commit. Judith felt tears sting her eyes. If I come forward, David will find me. He'll kill me for real this time. Not if you have protection, not if you testify against him in a domestic violence case. We can build a real case with real evidence that puts him away for what he actually did. And if I don't?
Tom's expression darkened. Then I take what I know to the police. You get charged with conspiracy to commit fraud, filing a false report, and a half-dozen other crimes. Abigail goes down too. And David walks free anyway because the whole case against him collapses. That's blackmail. That's reality. Judith turned away, staring at the barn walls as if they held answers. Her whole plan was falling apart. The freedom she'd fought for was turning to ash. I need time, she said. You have 48 hours. After that, I go to the police with or without you. He left the folder on the workbench and walked toward the door, but before leaving, he turned back. For what it's worth, Mrs. Brown, I'm sorry this happened to you. No one should have to fake their death to feel safe, but two wrongs don't make a right, and right now you have a chance to fix one of them. Then he was gone, and Judith was alone in the darkness. She picked up the folder and read through it again, seeing the web of lies that had been spun around her simple plan to escape. Abigail had betrayed her. Or had she? Maybe Abigail thought she was helping, thought she was making sure David faced justice. But justice built on lies wasn't justice at all. Judith pulled out her burner phone and finally called the one number she'd been avoiding. Abigail answered on the first ring. Judith, where are you?
Are you safe? Did you pay Lily Porter to lie? Silence. Long, damning silence. Judith, answer the question. It's a complicated. It's a yes or no question, Abby. Another pause. Then, yes, I paid her. But it was necessary. David's lawyers would have torn apart the circumstantial evidence. We needed something concrete, something that would guarantee a conviction. You turned my escape plan into a murder conspiracy. I turned your escape plan into justice. David hurt you, Judith. He would have killed you eventually. This way, he goes to prison and you get to live. Isn't that what you wanted? Not like this. Never like this. Then what did you expect? That you could just disappear and David would face no consequences? He has money, power, connections. The only way to stop men like him is to play the game better than they do. Judith felt sick. A private investigator found me. Tom Bennett. He knows everything. She heard Abigail's sharp intake of breath. What did you tell him? Nothing yet, but he's giving me 48 hours to come forward or he goes to the police. Don't do it, Judith. If you come forward now, everything falls apart. David walks free. You face charges. I lose my job and probably go to prison. And for what? To save a man who deserves to rot in a cell? To tell the truth. The truth is that David Brown is a monster. The truth is that he hurt you for 5 years. The truth is that the system fails women like you every single day. The truth is that sometimes the only way to get justice is to take it yourself. This isn't justice. This is revenge. Call it what you want, but think very carefully before you throw away everything we've built. Think about what happens to you if you come forward. Think about whether saving David Brown is really worth destroying your own life. The call ended. Judith sat in the barn until dawn, turning over the impossible choice in her mind. Come forward and save an innocent man, but face prosecution and David's wrath? Stay hidden and let an innocent man go to prison for a crime he didn't commit? There was no good answer, no clean solution, just two kinds of wrong, and Judith had to choose which one she could live with. As the sun rose over the abandoned farm, Judith made her decision. And somewhere in the city, David Brown sat in his mansion under house arrest, wearing a GPS monitor, having no idea that his fate rested in the hands of the wife he'd driven to fake her own death.
Detective Sam Johnson had been a cop long enough to know when his partner was hiding something. The question was, what? He sat in his car outside Abigail's apartment building at 6 a.m., drinking burnt coffee from a gas station cup and watching her windows. This was stalker behavior, he knew, probably a violation of a half-dozen departmental policies. But something about the Judith Brown case wasn't adding up, and all roads seemed to lead back to his partner. At 6:30, Abigail emerged, got in her car, and drove. Sam followed at a distance, using all the tail techniques he'd learned in his 20 years on the force. She didn't go to the station. Instead, she drove to a diner on the edge of town, one of those places that served breakfast 24 hours and asked no questions. Sam parked across the street and watched through the diner's windows as Abigail sat in a booth. 5 minutes later, someone joined her. Dr. Michael Foster, the medical examiner. They talked for 20 minutes, their body language tense, urgent. At one point, Foster pulled out what looked like a file folder and slid it across the table. Abigail looked through it, then quickly tucked it into her bag. When they left, separately, Sam had to make a choice: follow Abigail or follow Foster. He chose Foster. The medical examiner drove straight to his office at the county morgue. Sam waited 15 minutes, then followed him inside, flashing his badge at the receptionist. "Detective Johnson, I need to speak with Dr. Foster about the Brown case." The receptionist called back, and a minute later, Foster appeared in the lobby. He looked pale.
Detective, I wasn't expecting you. I need to ask you some questions about Judith Brown's disappearance. I've already filed my reports. I know, but I want to go over them again, in your office if you don't mind. Foster hesitated, then nodded. Of course. His office was exactly what Sam expected. Medical texts, anatomy posters, the faint smell of formaldehyde seeping through the walls. Foster sat behind his desk, his hands clasped tightly. When a body is recovered from Clearwater Lake, how long would it typically take before decomposition makes identification difficult? It depends on water temperature, depth, whether the body is accessible to wildlife, but generally, in cold water like Clearwater, you'd have at least a week or two before significant decomposition. And if no body is found, then identification becomes nearly impossible without substantial evidence, like DNA from the victim's home, personal effects, medical records. Exactly. Sam leaned forward. Dr. Foster, how long have you known Detective Thompson? Foster's eye twitched. We've worked together for years. Why? And would you say you're friends? Colleagues. We're friendly colleagues. Friendly enough that she might ask you for a favor? I don't know what you're implying, Detective. I'm implying that I saw you meeting with her at a diner this morning. I'm implying that you passed her some kind of file. And I'm implying that something about this case stinks, and you're right in the middle of it. Foster stood up. I think you should leave. I think you should tell me the truth. I have nothing more to say to you. Sam stood too, but before leaving, he dropped one more bomb. We're reopening the investigation into the evidence handling in this case. Every report, every test, every piece of documentation is going to be reviewed by an independent examiner. If there's something you need to tell me, now would be the time. Foster's face went from pale to ashen. Am I under investigation? Should you be? Sam left without waiting for an answer. He had what he needed, confirmation that something was wrong. Now he just needed to prove it.
Back at the station, Rose Winters was holding a strategy meeting with her prosecution team. The trial was weeks away, and she was building her case like a general preparing for war. The key is the life insurance policy, she said, pacing in front of a whiteboard covered in timeline notes. David Brown took out $2 million on his wife 6 months before she disappeared. That's premeditation. Defense will argue it was normal financial planning, one of her assistants said. Then we counter with the pattern of abuse, the hospital records, the neighbor's testimony. We paint a picture of a controlling, violent man who saw his wife as property and decided to cash in. What about Lily Porter's credibility issues? Rose waved it off. The defense will try to discredit her. We'll rehabilitate her on redirect. She made mistakes as a teenager. Who hasn't? What matters is that she's telling the truth now. But even as she said it, Rose felt a flicker of doubt. She'd reviewed the file on Lily Porter's psychiatric history. The false accusation against her teacher was detailed, specific, and completely fabricated. Lily had believed it was true, but that didn't make it real. What if she believed she saw David Brown, but she hadn't? Rose shook off the thought. She'd built her career on trusting her instincts, and her instincts said David Brown was guilty. The evidence supported it. The jury would see it. She couldn't afford doubt now. Meanwhile, Jessica Hartley was pursuing her own investigation from a different angle. She'd been trying to track down the source of the payment to Lily Porter for days, following the money through shell companies and offshore accounts. Finally, she'd hit pay dirt. The payment had originated from an account linked to a law enforcement credit union. Not definitive proof of who made it, but suggestive. Jessica pulled up Detective Abigail Thompson's financial records. Getting them had required calling in every favor she had with sources in banking and law enforcement. There, a withdrawal of $5,000 in cash made 3 days before Lily Porter came forward as a witness. Jessica sat back in her chair, her mind racing. This was the story. This was the evidence of a conspiracy. But publishing it now would destroy the prosecution's case. David Brown would walk free, and if he really was an abusive monster, he'd go unpunished. Jessica had spent her career believing in the truth above all else, but what happened when the truth served injustice? She thought about calling Tom Bennett, comparing notes, but something held her back. Instead, she did what she always did when faced with an impossible choice. She wrote. She laid out everything she knew in a draft article, every fact meticulously documented, every source carefully protected. Then she saved it without publishing and went to see someone who might have answers. Bernard Klein, David Brown's attorney.
Klein's office was in a high-rise downtown, all glass and steel and expensive views. His secretary tried to turn Jessica away, but she'd made an appointment under a false name. When Klein saw her, he actually smiled. "Miss Hartley, I was wondering when you'd come calling. You knew I had investigated the witness payment? I suspect it. You're nothing if not thorough." He gestured to a chair. "Please, sit. Can I offer you coffee?" "I want answers. Don't we all?" Klein sat across from her, steepling his fingers. "You've discovered that someone paid Lily Porter to testify. You've traced it back to a law enforcement account, and now you're wondering what to do with that information. Did David Brown kill his wife? No. How can you be sure? Because I've seen the real evidence. The alibi is airtight. The forensics don't support the prosecution's timeline, and most damning of all, there's no body. Hard to commit murder when the victim might not even be dead." Jessica's eyes widened. "You think Judith Brown is alive?" "I think it's a possibility worth exploring. Have you told the police?" "They're not interested in alternative theories. They have their suspect. Rose Winters wants her conviction." Klein leaned forward. "Miss Hartley, you have a choice to make. You can publish your findings and blow up this case. David walks free, but so does whoever orchestrated this frame-up. Or you can help me find the real truth, figure out what actually happened to Judith Brown. And if David really did kill her, then I'll be the first to recommend he face the full penalty of the law. But if he didn't, if Judith Brown staged her own death and someone is using it to destroy an innocent man, don't you think that deserves to be exposed?" Jessica thought about it for exactly 3 seconds. "What do you need from me?" Klein smiled. "Everything you've found and your help tracking down one more person, someone who might know where Judith Brown really is." He slid a file across the desk. Inside was a photo of Tom Bennett. "Your investigator," she said. "He's been pursuing his own leads, and I think he's gotten closer to the truth than anyone else. The question is, whose side is he really on?"
Judith had 36 hours left to make her decision when everything changed. She was in the cabin, packing her belongings for the 3rd time, unable to decide whether she was preparing to run or preparing to surrender, when her phone buzzed with a news alert. "Breaking. New evidence surfaces in David Brown murder case. Prosecution seeking to introduce testimony from alleged prior victim." Judith's hands shook as she clicked through to the full article. Rose Winters, the prosecutor handling the David Brown murder case, announced today that they have located a witness who claims Brown assaulted her during a brief relationship 7 years ago. The witness, whose identity is being protected, allegedly suffered injuries similar to those documented in Judith Brown's medical records. Judith read it twice, then 3 times. 7 years ago, before she'd even met David. It was a lie. It had to be. David had his flaws, his controlling nature, his rage. But Judith had been his first victim. She'd checked during those long nights when she couldn't sleep, searching for other women who might have survived him. There were none, which meant someone had fabricated this witness, and Judith knew exactly who. She grabbed her burner phone and called Abigail. "Don't," Abigail said immediately, not even bothering with hello. "Whatever you're thinking, don't." "You created a fake victim?" I found someone willing to testify to the truth of what David is. The truth? Abby, if she's lying, she's telling the story you were too afraid to tell, the story of what David Brown does to women. Judith felt fury rise in her chest. This is insane. You're manufacturing evidence. I'm making sure he pays for what he did to you. Abigail's voice cracked. You don't get it, do you? I've watched you suffer for 5 years. I've watched you make excuses for him, go back to him, let him hurt you over and over. And when you finally got the courage to leave, you had to fake your own death because you were too scared to just walk away. Because he would have found me. And now he can't, because he's going to prison, because I made sure of it. Judith closed her eyes, trying to calm her racing heart. Abby, listen to me. Tom Bennett knows everything. He knows about the plan, about the fake witness, about all of it. If you don't stop now, if you don't come clean, then what? You'll testify against me, your best friend, the only person who tried to help you? I'll testify to the truth. The truth. Abigail laughed bitterly. The truth is that David Brown is a monster. The truth is that he deserved everything that's happening to him. And the truth is that you're too much of a coward to see this through. Abby, Judith began, don't contact me again. And if you're smart, you'll stay dead. Because if you come forward now, I'll make sure you go down for every crime we committed together. Fraud, filing a false report, conspiracy. I'll bury you, Judith. Don't think I won't. The line went dead. Judith sat in stunned silence. Her friend, her protector, had just threatened her. The person she'd trusted with her life had become someone she didn't recognize. Or maybe Judith had never really known her at all.
24 hours left. Sam Johnson had spent the night reviewing every piece of evidence in the Judith Brown case, and he'd finally found the crack he'd been looking for. The medical examiner's report on Judith's previous injuries, the one that supported the prosecution's domestic violence narrative. Sam had requested the original hospital records, not Dr. Foster's summary. What he found was interesting. The sprained wrist, documented as occurring during a hiking accident, witnessed by 2 friends. David Brown hadn't even been present. The bruised ribs, from a car accident where Judith had been the driver. The police report showed no signs of domestic dispute. The concussion, Judith had fainted at school due to low blood pressure. Multiple witnesses confirmed David wasn't there. Every injury had a legitimate, documented explanation that had nothing to do with abuse. So why had Dr. Foster's report characterized them as consistent with domestic violence? Sam knew the answer, because someone had asked him to. He picked up his phone and called the one person he thought might tell him the truth. Dr. Foster, this is Detective Johnson. I need you to come to the station now. I'm in the middle of an autopsy. Then finish it and get here, because I'm about to open an investigation into evidence tampering, and you have one chance to get ahead of it. 2 hours later, Dr. Foster sat in an interrogation room, his lawyer beside him, his face the color of old parchment. I want immunity, Foster said. Tell me what you know, and we'll see. Foster looked at his lawyer, who nodded. Abigail Thompson asked me to characterize Judith Brown's injuries as consistent with domestic abuse. She said it was important for building a protective case against the husband, that Judith was too scared to come forward herself. And you just agreed? She helped my daughter years ago, kept her out of jail for a drug charge. I owed her. So you falsified a report. I characterized it differently. The injuries were real. But the cause wasn't domestic violence. Foster was quiet. What else? Sam demanded. What else did she ask you to do? She wanted me to prepare paperwork for a misidentification in case a body was found that wasn't Judith Brown. She said it was contingency planning. Sam felt his blood run cold. You were going to identify the wrong body as Judith Brown? If necessary, to close the case. Jesus Christ! Sam stood up, pacing the small room. Do you have any idea what you've done? You've helped frame an innocent man for murder. David Brown isn't innocent. That's not your call to make. That's what trials are for. That's what evidence is for. Sam leaned across the table. Where is Judith Brown? I don't know, I swear. But she's alive. Sam hesitated, then nodded. Yes, I think so. Yes. Sam left the interrogation room and immediately called Rose Winters. We have a problem, a big one.
12 hours left. Tom Bennett sat in his car outside the cabin where Judith Brown was hiding. He'd given her 48 hours to make her decision, but he couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out faster than any of them realized. His phone rang. Jessica Hartley. "I know who paid Lily Porter," she said without preamble, "and I know there's a second fake witness claiming David abused her years ago." Abigail Thompson. "How did you—" "I'm a PI. It's my job." Tom checked his watch. "The question is, what are you going to do with that information?" "I'm going to publish it. Tomorrow morning, front page. Police detective frames innocent man for murder." That'll end her career. That'll end a conspiracy. And Judith Brown? Jessica was quiet for a moment. "Is she alive?" "Yes." "Where is she?" "That's not something I can tell you, yet." "Tom, if you're obstructing—" "I'm trying to give her a chance to do the right thing. She has until tomorrow to come forward on her own. If she doesn't, I'll bring her in myself. And if she runs, then we'll find her, but I'd rather she choose to come back." After the call ended, Tom got out of his car and walked up to the cabin. He knocked on the door. Judith answered, her eyes red from crying. "Time's up," Tom said gently. "What's it going to be?" Judith looked at him, at this stranger who somehow understood her impossible position better than anyone else. "If I come forward," she said, "will you protect me?" "I'll do everything I can." "From David?" "From everyone." Judith thought about Abigail's threat, about Rose Winters' ambition, about the fake witnesses and manufactured evidence, about the monster she'd created by trying to escape another monster. "Okay," she said quietly. "I'll testify. I'll tell them everything. Even about Abigail." Judith's eyes filled with tears. "Even about Abigail." Tom nodded. "Then let's go, before everyone's lives get destroyed beyond repair." As they drove back toward the city, Judith watched the landscape roll past, knowing she was driving toward her own destruction, but also knowing that sometimes destroying the lie was the only way to live with the truth.
At exactly 6 a.m., Judith Brown walked into the Central Police Station with Tom Bennett at her side. She was wearing a baseball cap and sunglasses, her blonde hair tucked under the brim, but it didn't matter. The desk sergeant recognized her immediately. Within minutes, the station erupted into chaos. Sam Johnson was called in from home. Rose Winters arrived 20 minutes later, still in yesterday's clothes, looking like she'd aged 10 years overnight. Bernard Klein showed up with David Brown on video call, the defendant's GPS monitor blinking in the corner of the screen. And Abigail Thompson, who'd been working the night shift, stood in the corner of the observation room, watching through the one-way glass as her best friend prepared to destroy her. "Before we begin," Bernard Klein said, his voice crisp despite the early hour, "I want it on record that my client, David Brown, has been wrongfully imprisoned and slandered. I'll be filing motions to dismiss all charges and pursuing civil action against the city." "Save it for the courtroom," Rose Winters snapped, though her face was pale. Her perfect murder case was dissolving before her eyes. Inside the interrogation room, Judith sat with her hands folded on the table. She'd refused a lawyer, refused water, refused everything except the chance to tell her story. Sam Johnson sat across from her, a recorder running, a stenographer in the corner. "State your name for the record." "Judith Ellen Brown." "And you understand that you're here voluntarily, that you have the right to an attorney?" "I understand. I want to tell you what I did." "Okay." Sam leaned back. "Start from the beginning." And so Judith did. She told them about the abuse, about the fear, about the times David had hurt her and she'd made excuses. She told them about planning her escape with Abigail, about Dr. Foster's help, about the careful staging of her death. She told them everything except the parts that were lies. Because this was where it got complicated. This was where Judith had to decide how much truth to tell. She could expose Abigail completely, tell them about the paid witness, about the falsified medical reports, about the fake prior victim. She could burn down everything her friend had built. Or she could shoulder the blame herself, say it was all her idea, that Abigail had only helped with the initial disappearance and didn't know about the rest. "Detective Thompson helped you stage your death," Sam Johnson prompted when Judith paused. "What else did she do?" Judith looked through the one-way glass, though she couldn't see Abigail standing on the other side. But she knew she was there, could feel her presence like a weight. "She helped me disappear," Judith said carefully. "She knew I was alive. She knew David didn't kill me." "And she let him be arrested anyway?" "Yes." "Did she plant evidence? Did she pay witnesses?" This was it, the moment of choice. Judith thought about the threats Abigail had made, about the promise to bury her if she came forward, about how her best friend had become her enemy in the space of a single phone call. But she also thought about the 15 years they'd been friends, about the time Abigail had held her after David's first violent outburst, about the promise they'd made to each other in high school, sisters forever. "No," Judith lied. "The witness must have been mistaken. Abigail didn't plant anything." Sam's eyes narrowed. He knew she was lying, but proving it was different than knowing it. "Mrs. Brown, do you understand that you're facing serious charges? Fraud, filing a false police report, conspiracy. The DA could push for prison time." "I understand." "Then why are you protecting Detective Thompson?" "I'm not protecting anyone. I'm telling you what happened." Outside the interrogation room, Rose Winters was already calculating damage control. Her political career was on the line. The news would break within hours. She'd tried to prosecute an innocent man for murdering a woman who was still alive. She'd be a laughingstock. Worse, she'd be seen as incompetent. Unless she could spin this right. "We were lied to," she said to her assistant, already crafting the narrative. "A troubled woman manipulated law enforcement to escape her marriage. We acted on the evidence we had. The real villain here is Judith Brown." Bernard Klein, overhearing this, smiled coldly. "Good luck with that, Miss Winters. I'll be sure to quote you in my lawsuit." David Brown's voice came through Klein's phone. "I want to see her." "Not advisable," Klein said. "I don't care. I want to see my wife." Klein glanced at Sam Johnson, who overheard the request. "No," Sam said flatly. "Absolutely not." "She's not under arrest yet," Klein pointed out, "and my client has a right to confront her accuser." "Your client is the reason she's here." "According to her testimony, which you've just established is unreliable." They glared at each other across the observation room. Finally, Sam made a decision he'd probably regret. 5 minutes, supervised, in a conference room, and if he so much as raises his voice, we're done.
Judith was led to a conference room on the second floor. She sat in a chair, her hands shaking, waiting for the man she'd feared for 5 years to walk through the door. When David entered, she flinched. He looked different, thinner, tired. The GPS monitor around his ankle was visible beneath his pants.
but his eyes were the same, dark, intense, unreadable. "Hello, Judith." "Hello, David." They stared at each other across the table. Tom Bennett stood in the corner, his hand near his concealed weapon. Sam Johnson watched through the window. "Why?" David asked simply. "You know why. I was never going to hurt you." Judith laughed, a bitter sound. "You hurt me every day." "I loved you. You controlled me. There's a difference." David's jaw tightened. "Is this what you wanted? To destroy my life? To make me into a monster? You did that yourself. I never laid a hand on you." "You didn't have to." Judith's voice rose. "You isolated me from my friends. You monitored my phone. You made me account for every minute of every day. You broke me down piece by piece until I didn't even recognize myself anymore." "That's not abuse. That's marriage." "It's abuse, David. It was always abuse, and I was so deep in it that I couldn't see any way out except to die." David leaned forward. "And Detective Thompson, what was her role in all this?" Judith met his eyes. "She helped a friend. She framed me for murder. You were never going to be convicted." "Wasn't I?" David smiled coldly. "You underestimate how much people want to believe the worst of men like me, rich, successful, confident. The jury would have eaten it up. The jury would have followed the evidence that was manufactured." Judith didn't respond to that. David stood up. "I hope it was worth it, Judith, whatever freedom you thought you'd find by faking your death, because you're going to prison, and I'm going to make sure everyone knows what you did. And everyone will know what you did, too. I didn't do anything. You drove me to this. You made me so desperate that I thought death was the only escape. That's on you." David paused at the door. "I'll see you in court." Then he was gone, and Judith was alone with Tom Bennett. "You okay?" Tom asked. "No," Judith said honestly, "but I will be. Because despite everything, despite the charges she faced and the friendship she'd lost and the life she'd destroyed, Judith felt something she hadn't felt in 5 years. Relief. The truth was out, the lies were done, and whatever came next, at least she'd face it as herself."
By noon, the story had broken nationwide. "Woman fakes death. Husband wrongly accused of murder," screamed the headlines. Cable news ran the story on a loop. Social media exploded with hot takes, conspiracy theories, and armchair legal analysis. Jessica Hartley's article went viral within an hour of posting. She'd held back on publishing the evidence about Abigail Thompson's involvement, but the basic story was explosive enough. A woman so desperate to escape her marriage that she'd staged her own death, triggering a murder investigation that nearly sent an innocent man to prison. Well, mostly innocent. The article also detailed David Brown's pattern of psychological abuse, drawing from Judith's statement and interviews with friends and colleagues who'd witnessed his controlling behavior. Jessica had been careful to separate legal innocence from moral culpability. David hadn't killed his wife, but he'd helped create the circumstances that made her believe she had to die to be free. At the police station, Internal Affairs had already opened an investigation into Abigail Thompson. She'd been placed on administrative leave, her badge and gun surrendered, pending a full review. Sam Johnson found her in the locker room, packing up her personal items. "You want to tell me the truth now, before IA gets their teeth into you?" Abigail looked at him with red-rimmed eyes. "What does it matter? Judith already gave her statement. My career is over." "She protected you. She didn't tell them about the witness payments or the fake prior victim." "I know. So why did you do it? Why go so far?" Abigail sat down on the bench, her shoulders slumping. Have you ever watched someone you love suffer and felt completely powerless to help them? This isn't about love, Abby. This is about obsession. Maybe, she laughed bitterly. I've been in love with Judith since we were 16. Did you know that? All through high school, college, her wedding to David, I watched her choose him over and over, and I hated it. Hated him. Sam sat down beside her. So when she came to you for help, I saw my chance to save her, to be her hero, and maybe, in some stupid fantasy, to finally be the person she chose. Jessica wiped her eyes. But she was never going to choose me. Even now, even after everything, she protected David by not fully exposing what I did. She protected you, not David. Same difference. She couldn't fully commit to destroying him, even when he deserved it. That's how deep his control went. That's not how the law works, Abby. You can't punish people for crimes they didn't commit, no matter how much you think they deserve it. I know that now. Do you? Sam looked at her. Because I need to know. Are there other cases, other investigations you've manipulated because you thought you knew better than the evidence? Abigail met his eyes. No, just this one. Just Judith. Sam wanted to believe her, but trust, once broken, was hard to rebuild. IA will want a full statement. You should get a lawyer. Already called one. Abigail stood up, shouldering her bag. For what it's worth, Sam, I'm sorry. You deserved a better partner. Yeah, I did.
At the DA's office, Rose Winters was in full damage control mode. She'd called a press conference for 3 p.m., and she was preparing the speech of her life. Her political career depended on it. We acted in good faith on the evidence presented to us, she rehearsed, pacing her office. This was an unprecedented case of fraud and manipulation. While we regret that Mr. Brown was charged, our primary concern was always justice for what we believed was a murder victim. Her assistant looked up from her laptop. Social media isn't buying it. They're calling for your resignation. Social media always calls for someone's resignation. What matters is the governor's office. The governor's chief of staff called. She wants a meeting tomorrow. Rose closed her eyes. That wasn't good. The governor had been one of her biggest supporters, had seen her as a rising star in the party. If that relationship soured, her political future was dead. Fine, set it up. She turned to her legal team. What are our options with Judith Brown? We can charge her with filing a false police report, fraud, potentially conspiracy, depending on how deep Detective Thompson's involvement goes. We're looking at anywhere from probation to 5 years. Probation? Rose's voice was sharp. This woman triggered a murder investigation and nearly sent an innocent man to prison. We're throwing the book at her. That might not play well with the public, her PR advisor warned. A lot of people see her as a domestic violence victim who felt she had no other choice. A lot of people are idiots who get their legal education from crime dramas, Rose snapped. This woman is a criminal, and I'm going to make sure everyone knows it. Her assistant cleared his throat. There's something else. Bernard Klein has filed a civil lawsuit against the city. He's seeking $10 million in damages for false arrest and malicious prosecution. Of course he is. Rose rubbed her temples. Anything else? David Brown is giving an interview to 60 Minutes, airs Sunday night. Rose laughed, a sound with no humor in it. Perfect. Just perfect. At his downtown office, Bernard Klein was having the best day of his career. His client was innocent. The charges would be dropped. The lawsuit would likely settle for millions. And his phone had been ringing non-stop with calls from other high-profile defendants wanting his representation. But there was still one piece of unfinished business. He called Tom Bennett. We need to talk about your fee. Standard rate plus expenses. I'll send you the invoice. I think we can do better than that. You just saved my client from a murder conviction. That's worth a bonus. Just doing my job.
You did more than your job. You found the truth when everyone else was happy with a convenient lie. Klein paused. You also got Judith Brown to come forward. How did you manage that? I gave her a choice. She made the right one. You threatened her. I gave her information and let her decide what to do with it. There's a difference. Klein smiled. I like you, Bennett. If you ever want to move beyond private investigation work, I could use someone with your skills on my team. I'll keep that in mind. After the call ended, Tom sat in his office looking at the photo of Judith Brown that he'd been using for the investigation. She'd looked so different when they first met at the barn, scared, desperate, trapped even in her freedom. But when she'd walked into the police station that morning, something had changed. She looked lighter somehow, despite knowing she was walking into handcuffs and charges. There was strength in truth, even when the truth cost everything. Tom's phone buzzed. A text from Jessica Hartley. Drinks tonight? I want to compare notes. Sure, but you're buying. I just solved your story for you. My story? I've been investigating this for weeks. And I'm the one who found the victim. Advantage me. We'll see about that. Tom was looking forward to the conversation. Jessica was sharp, ethical, and committed to the truth as Tom was. In a case full of liars and manipulators, it was refreshing to work with someone who valued honesty, even if she was annoyingly competitive.
That evening, Judith sat in a holding cell at the county jail, waiting for her arraignment in the morning. They'd offered her bail, but she had nowhere to go and no money to post it with. The fake identity's accounts had been frozen. Her real accounts were jointly held with David, who'd certainly locked her out by now. She had nothing. No home, no job, no friends except the one who'd betrayed her and the one she'd betrayed in return. But she also had something she hadn't had in 5 years: peace. A guard approached her cell. You have a visitor. Judith looked up, surprised. Who would visit her? She was led to a private meeting room. Inside sat a woman she didn't recognize at first. Mid-40s, expensively dressed, kind eyes. Mrs. Brown, my name is Carolyn Walsh. I'm with the FBI. Judith's heart sank. Federal charges, of course. I'm not here to arrest you, Carolyn said quickly, seeing Judith's expression. I'm here to offer you a deal. What kind of deal? Carolyn pulled out a file. We've been investigating David Brown for the past 6 months, not for your disappearance, for something else entirely. She opened the file and slid it across the table. Inside were financial records, offshore accounts, shell companies. Money laundering, Carolyn explained. Your husband has been moving money for some very dangerous people, drug cartels, organized crime. We've been building a RICO case, but we need an insider to testify. I don't know anything about his business dealings. You know more than you think. 5 years of marriage. You've seen documents, overheard conversations, noticed patterns. With your help, we can bring down not just David, but an entire criminal network. Judith stared at the papers. What are you offering? Full immunity on the fraud charges, witness protection, a new life with a real identity, not a fake one, and most importantly, David Brown goes to prison for a very long time. And if I refuse? Then we pursue our case without you. It'll take longer, be harder to prove, and you'll face state charges for what you did, probably 3 to 5 years in prison. Judith thought about it. Another fake identity, another life on the run, but this time with the law's protection instead of its pursuit. I need to think about it. You have 24 hours. Carolyn stood up. Mrs. Brown, I've seen the reports about what David did to you, the psychological abuse, the control. I believe you, and I want to help you. But I also want to stop him from helping criminals hurt other people. This is a chance for real justice. After Carolyn left, Judith sat alone in the meeting room, turning over this new information. David was a criminal, not just an abusive husband, but an actual criminal working with drug cartels. Part of her wasn't surprised. The expensive gifts on a lawyer's salary, the late-night phone calls he'd taken in another room, the offshore accounts she'd seen statements for but been forbidden to ask about. She'd known something was wrong. She'd just been too focused on surviving to investigate. Now she had a choice: help the FBI and get immunity, or face the consequences of her actions alone. It should have been an easy decision, but nothing in Judith's life had been easy for a very long time.
Judith had 12 hours left to decide when Abigail came to see her. The detective looked different in civilian clothes, without her badge, without the authority she'd worn like armor for 15 years. She looked smaller somehow, human. They sat across from each other in the jail's visiting room, separated by plexiglass and phones that crackled with static. "I'm sorry," Abigail said first. "For what? Threatening me? Framing David? Or dragging me into a conspiracy I never agreed to?" "All of it." Abigail's eyes were red. "I thought I was helping you. I thought I was protecting you. You were trying to control me, just like David did, just in a different way." The words hit like a slap. Abigail flinched. "That's not fair." "Isn't it? You made decisions for me without asking. You escalated a plan I thought was simple into something criminal. You threatened to destroy me if I didn't do what you wanted." Judith leaned forward. "How is that different from what David did?" "Because I love you." Abigail's voice broke. "I've loved you since we were kids, Judith. Everything I did was because I couldn't stand watching you suffer anymore." Love doesn't give you the right to control someone. Love doesn't give you the right to make their choices for them. Abigail was crying now, not bothering to hide it. "I know, God, I know, and I've destroyed everything. My career, our friendship, probably my freedom when IA finishes their investigation. You should have thought about that before you paid Lily Porter, before you created a fake witness, before you turned my escape plan into a frame-up. I just wanted him to pay. And now we both are." They sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of ruined lives pressing down on them. "The FBI came to see me," Judith said finally. "They want me to testify against David for money laundering." Abigail's eyebrows rose. "Money laundering?" "Apparently he's been working with drug cartels for years. They're offering me immunity if I help them build their case." "You should take it." "I know, but you're hesitating." Judith nodded. "Another fake identity, another life in hiding. I'm tired, Abby. I'm so tired of running." "Then don't run. Testify against him and start over here. Get a lawyer, fight the fraud charges. Maybe you'll get probation, community service. You can rebuild." "With what? I have no money, no job, no references because I'm supposed to be dead. How do you rebuild from nothing?" "The same way everyone does, one day at a time." Judith laughed bitterly. "Is that what you're going to do? Rebuild one day at a time?" "I don't know if I get that option. IA is talking about criminal charges, conspiracy, obstruction of justice. I might be in the cell next to yours." "Good." Abigail met her eyes. "You really hate me now." "I don't hate you, but I don't trust you, and I'm not sure I can forgive you." "I understand." The guard announced that visiting time was over. As Abigail stood to leave, she said, "For what it's worth, Judith, you deserve better than David, better than me, better than all of this. I hope you take the FBI's offer. I hope you get the fresh start you always wanted." "I hope you get what you deserve too," Judith said. Abigail smiled sadly. "I'm pretty sure I will."
The next morning, Judith's arraignment was a media circus. Cameras packed the courthouse. Reporters shouted questions. Protesters held signs, split between those who saw her as a victim and those who saw her as a criminal.
Rose Winters personally handled the prosecution, standing before the judge with righteous fury. Your Honor, the defendant engaged in an elaborate fraud that cost this city hundreds of thousands of dollars in search and rescue operations, tied up law enforcement resources, and nearly resulted in the wrongful conviction of an innocent man. We are seeking the maximum sentence. Judith's public defender, a tired-looking man named Robert Chen, who'd been assigned to her case 3 hours ago, did his best. Your Honor, my client is a victim of severe domestic abuse who felt she had no other option but to fake her death to escape her husband. She's come forward voluntarily, she's cooperating fully, and she poses no flight risk or danger to the community. We request release on her own recognizance. Judge Hernandez looked at Judith over her glasses. Mrs. Brown, you've certainly made a mess of things. Yes, Your Honor. Do you understand the severity of the charges against you? I do. And do you understand that your actions, while perhaps motivated by fear, were still crimes? I do. The judge reviewed the file in front of her. Bail is set at $50,000. Trial date is set for 60 days from now. The defendant will surrender any remaining false identification documents and will not leave the state pending trial. The gavel fell. Judith was led back to her cell, where she'd stay until someone posted bail. Since she had no one and no money, that might be a while. But 2 hours later, a guard came to process her release. Someone posted your bail. Who? The guard shrugged. Anonymous donor, through a bail bond service. You're free to go. Judith was handed her personal effects in a plastic bag and led to the exit. Outside, the media was waiting, but so was someone else. Tom Bennett. You posted my bail? Judith asked as he led her to his car, shielding her from cameras. Consider it an investment in justice. I can't pay you back. I'm not asking you to. He opened the car door for her. But you do owe me an answer. Are you taking the FBI's deal? Judith got in the car. Drive.
Tom pulled out of the parking lot, leaving the media circus behind. They drove in silence for 10 minutes before Judith finally spoke. If I testify against David, he'll kill me. Deal or no deal, witness protection or not, he has the connections to find me. The FBI is pretty good at hiding people. The FBI has never dealt with someone like David. He's smart, patient, vengeful. He'll wait years if he has to. So what's your alternative? Prison? I don't know. Judith stared out the window at the city passing by. Her city, the place she'd lived for a decade, trying to build a life that kept crumbling around her. Maybe I deserve prison. Maybe that's the price for what I did. You don't believe that. Don't I? She looked at him. I ruined an innocent man's life. I wasted police resources. I lied to everyone. Maybe I'm not the victim in this story. Maybe I'm just another bad person making bad choices. David Brown isn't innocent, Tom said firmly. He might not have killed you, but he's guilty of plenty. The FBI wouldn't be building a RICO case against him if he was some upstanding citizen. That doesn't make what I did right. No, but it means you have a chance to do something right now. Help the FBI. Put away a criminal who's helping cartels poison communities. That's got to count for something. Judith was quiet for a long time. Where are you taking me? Safe house. FBI's already set it up. Agent Walsh is waiting. You're working with them? They asked me to help convince you. Figured you might trust me more than a federal agent you just met. Should I trust you? Tom glanced at her. I found you when you didn't want to be found. I made you come forward when you wanted to stay hidden. I've done nothing but complicate your life since we met. But you did it for the right reasons. Did I? Or did I do it because Bernard Klein was paying me and I wanted to solve the case? Tom pulled up to a nondescript house in a quiet neighborhood. Truth is, Mrs. Brown, everyone's got mixed motives. Everyone's trying to balance what's right with what benefits them. The question is, what are you willing to live with?
Carolyn Walsh was waiting inside, along with 2 other agents and a conference table covered in files. "Mrs. Brown," Carolyn said warmly, "thank you for coming. Can I get you anything? Coffee? Water?" "Answers," Judith said. "I want to know exactly what you're asking me to do, and I want to know what happens to me after." "Fair enough." Carolyn opened the first file. "Let's start with what we know about your husband."
For 3 hours, Caroline Walsh laid out the FBI's case against David Brown, and with each revelation, Judith's world tilted further. David wasn't just laundering money for drug cartels. He was the linchpin of an operation that moved hundreds of millions of dollars through legitimate businesses, real estate purchases, and offshore accounts. His law practice was a front, his clients a mix of actual legal work and criminal enterprises hiding behind attorney-client privilege. "We've been investigating for 18 months, Caroline explained, showing Judith photos of men she didn't recognize. "These are the people David works with: cartel leadership from Mexico, Russian organized crime, Chinese triads. He's built himself into an indispensable broker." "I don't understand," Judith said, her head spinning. "He's a defense attorney. He goes to court. He has legitimate clients." "He does. That's what makes him so effective. The criminal work is hidden among the legitimate practice. Most of his associates don't even know. His secretary doesn't know. Even his partners at the firm don't know the full extent." "Then how did you find out?" "A cooperating witness from one of the cartels, someone David trusted who got arrested on federal charges and decided to talk rather than spend life in prison." Caroline pulled up another photo. "Unfortunately, that witness died in custody 3 weeks ago, apparent suicide." "But it wasn't." "We can't prove it wasn't, but it's suspicious timing." Judith looked at the photo of the dead witness and felt ice in her veins. "And you want me to take his place? You have access David didn't know he was giving you. 5 years of marriage, shared finances, even if he controlled them. You've been in his home office. You've seen documents. You've overheard conversations." "I don't remember any specific conversations about drug cartels." "You don't have to. We just need you to authenticate documents, confirm timelines, establish patterns. The evidence builds the case. Your testimony corroborates it." One of the other agents, a man who'd been silent until now, leaned forward. "Mrs. Brown, I understand your hesitation. This is dangerous. David Brown has already demonstrated that people who threaten him end up dead, but we can protect you." "Like you protected the last witness?" The agent had the grace to look uncomfortable. "That was a failure of our security protocols. We've implemented new measures since then." "New measures," Judith laughed without humor. "David will find me. You don't understand how persistent he is, how patient. He'll wait years if he has to." "Which is why we're offering you complete identity change, new name, new background, relocation to a different part of the country, ongoing protection for as long as necessary." "And what about the charges I'm facing, the fraud, the false police report?" "Full immunity. The state drops everything. You walk away clean." "Except I have to testify against my husband in a federal trial that could take months. I have to relive 5 years of abuse in front of a jury. I have to put a target on my back for the rest of my life." "Yes," Caroline said, simply. "That's exactly what we're asking you to do." Judith stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the street looked normal. Kids riding bikes, a mail carrier making deliveries, people living ordinary lives without fear. She'd wanted that, a normal life, freedom from fear. But maybe she'd never get it. Maybe the price of escaping David was spending the rest of her life looking over her shoulder. "I need guarantees," Judith said, not turning around. "Real ones, not just promises." "What kind of guarantees?" "A security detail. Not just during the trial, after, for at least 5 years." "We can do 3 years, 5, non-negotiable." Caroline exchanged glances with the other agents. 5 years, you have my word. I want it in writing, in the immunity agreement. Done. And I want to choose where I'm relocated. I don't want to be stuck somewhere I hate." We can give you options, within reason. You can't pick Manhattan or Miami, but we can work with you on location." Judith turned back to face them. "One more thing. Abigail Thompson, the detective who helped me fake my death. What about her? She's facing state charges, conspiracy, obstruction, maybe federal charges too if you pursue it. I want her included in my immunity deal." Caroline frowned. "That's not something we can necessarily—" "Then we don't have a deal." Judith crossed her arms. "Abigail made mistakes. She went too far, but she was trying to help me when no one else would. I'm not going to save myself and let her go to prison. She framed your husband for murder. My husband is a money launderer for drug cartels. Seems like she had the right instinct about him, even if her methods were wrong." The agents conferred in whispers. Finally, Caroline nodded. "We can talk to the DA, see if we can work something out, but I can't promise anything. Try harder." Caroline actually smiled at that. "You're tougher than you look, Mrs. Brown." "I've had to be." "All right, we'll push for Detective Thompson to be included, but you need to understand, if we do this, if we get her immunity too, she's done as a cop. Her career is over. She knows that already. She just doesn't want to go to prison for trying to protect a friend." Caroline stood and extended her hand. "Do we have a deal?" Judith looked at the offered handshake, thinking about everything it represented. Safety, but at a cost. Justice, but through betrayal. Freedom, but bought with testimony against the man she'd once loved enough to marry. She shook Caroline's hand. "Good. We'll get the paperwork drawn up tonight. You'll need to review it with an attorney." "I don't have an attorney." "We can provide one, someone who specializes in witness protection agreements." "How convenient." "Mrs. Brown, I know you don't trust easily. After what you've been through, I don't blame you. But I'm asking you to trust us now. We're the good guys." "The good guys," Judith repeated. "Everyone thinks they're the good guys." "True, but we're the ones actually trying to stop drug traffickers from poisoning communities. That's got to count for something." Judith thought about the dead witness, about Caroline's promise of protection that might or might not hold, about David's network of criminals who'd killed before and would kill again. "When does the testimony start?" "Grand jury next week. Trial in 3 months if we can move it that quickly." 3 months. "And after that?" "After that, you disappear. New name, new life, and hopefully new peace." Judith nodded slowly. "Okay, let's do it."
The federal trial of David Brown lasted 6 weeks. The prosecution presented mountains of evidence, financial records, wire transfers, surveillance footage, and testimony from former associates who'd turned state's evidence. And at the center of it all was Judith Brown. She sat on the witness stand for 3 days, walking the jury through 5 years of marriage to a man who'd hidden his criminal empire behind expensive suits and courtroom victories. She authenticated documents, she confirmed timelines, she described the offshore accounts, the late-night meetings, the coded phone calls she'd overheard but never understood. Bernard Klein cross-examined her ruthlessly, hammering at her credibility, reminding the jury she'd faked her own death and lied to police. But the financial evidence was overwhelming. The paper trail didn't lie, even if Judith had. David never testified. On Klein's advice, he remained silent, his expression cold and calculating throughout the trial. The jury deliberated for 4 days. When they returned, the verdict was unanimous, guilty on all 17 counts. Judith wasn't in the courtroom when the verdict was read. She was already in her new life in a small town in Montana, watching the news coverage from a safe house with FBI agents standing guard outside. Catherine Hayes, her new name, her real fresh start, felt the weight lift from her shoulders as the verdict was announced. 25 years to life.
David would be in his 60s when he became eligible for parole. Maybe older, maybe never. Carolyn Walsh called her immediately. It's over. He's going to ADX Florence. Maximum security. No contact with the outside world. You're safe now. Am I? Catherine asked. Really safe? As safe as we can make you. The threats have decreased dramatically. His network is moving on. You can start living again. And slowly, carefully, Catherine did.